Whenever self-improvement alpha bros want to brag, and trust me, it's very, very often, the first thing that they want to brag about is their cars. What they don't know is that they probably ought to be bragging about their motorcycles, which of course they don't have, mainly owing to thoughts about safety. Their parents say, no, never get a motorcycle, it's too dangerous. Your friends, cousins, uncles, dogs, stepfathers, godfathers, grandfathers, nieces, nephews, cousin died on a motorcycle a few years back. I highly recommend you do some ChatGPT research on your own about this. A lot of the concerns about safety are really just trumped up to an extent that is absolutely unrealistic. If you'll notice, people who know a lot about motorcycling will almost never counsel you to not ride because of the dangers. Because they know that, first of all, around 57 out of every 100,000 registered motorcyclists die on the road every year. And 56 of those 57 are being stupid. They're riding drunk, they're riding at night, they're not visible, they're not geared, blah, blah, blah. So don't even worry about safety if you consider ever riding on a motorcycle. I mean, of course, worry to the extent that you get the proper gear and you learn how to ride defensively and you learn how to be responsible. But as long as you're being responsible, you don't have that much to fear. Okay, but now that I've dispelled the most common reason that people don't want to get a motorcycle, that still begs the question, why should I get a motorcycle as opposed to getting a car? And this is mainly directed at, younger men who don't really have a family yet, who are just driving themselves around. If you have a family, if you have kids and whatnot, a lot of people that you need to be driving around, then of course getting a car is going to be a much better option. But for young men who are on their own, just driving themselves around, making their way through life, building themselves up until they get a family and a car in the future, this video is for you. Plus, it doesn't hurt that many of the benefits that I'm going to explain apply to societies in general. And also, most of the time, even when you have a family, when you're riding or driving, you're usually just driving or riding yourself, just getting yourself to work and whatnot. So even then, a motorcycle offers a lot of benefits. Most people think of motorcycles as hobbies, as passion projects, that thing you buy because you want to, not because it's a good decision in a practical sense. But practically speaking, motorcycles will save you an immense amount. Especially if you're a young man, you're going to college, say, you already got college debt, you don't want vehicle debt on top of that. An average new car, even an average used car, will set you back tens of thousands of dollars. If you find a car for under $10,000, it's probably a jalopy. And your average new motorcycle is between 5 and 10K, usually closer to 5, somewhere around 6, 7K new. If you get a motorcycle used, you can get a good enough motorcycle for a few K. $1K, $1,500, around there you have your jalopy cycles that I probably wouldn't trust with my life if I were you, but you can go pretty cheap. But the most important difference in terms of costs is the long-term costs of riding a motorcycle. Motorcycles, shock of all shocks, a lot smaller than cars. But what people really don't think about when getting a motorcycle, because they think of a motorcycle as an extra expense rather than something that you do instead of getting a car, is the fact that you spend way, way less on gas. And people underestimate the extent to which you spend less on gas. Above 100 miles per gallon, that's not even crazy. That's not even special for a motorcycle. Repairs, you have to go for them less often and they're cheaper. Motorcycles do break down earlier. For a motorcycle to make it to 100,000 miles is like you gotta maintain a motorcycle well for it to even reach that level. But getting a new one is so cheap that still over the long run, you're spending less. Even if you have a car and a motorcycle, your car is gonna last way longer because most of the time you're just riding your motorcycle instead. Now, people really don't think about saving money in terms of a societal benefit. It's usually a pretty me-based benefit. But if you notice, a lot of the issues in our society nowadays, how people aren't getting married, all the complaints that people have about the economy, I can't find jobs, I can't this, I can't that, a lot of things have to do with money. And also a lot of things have to do with people not having kids. A car is necessary for when you already have a good number of kids. A motorcycle can often be very useful for people to build up the money because they're not spending as much of it so that they can eventually have kids. And when people don't need as much money, they can save up more and they can spend more on other things, and the economy just becomes more resilient in general. The next potential benefit is mainly just a societal benefit, but it's very interesting because it goes against what you'd expect. And this benefit is safety. Safety? You're on a motorcycle. And yep, that's true. You don't have a ton of armor surrounding you. That's what makes things safer for people in general, the more there are people riding motorcycles. In cars, especially in these big, fat, padded American land monsters that we have over here in, well, America, it's very, very easy to become complacent and distracted and to not look where you're going. This is how a lot of motorcycle accidents happen. A lot of motorcycle accidents, more than people think, are actually single vehicle accidents because the driver was being stupid and panicked or was drunk or whatever. But when another vehicle is involved, generally the other vehicle didn't see the motorcyclist because the driver was distracted. It's really, really easy to become distracted when you're in a car because you feel invincible because you have all those protections. And ironically, that can end up elevating your risk potentially even more than in a motorcycle. Certainly your risk is far, far higher of hurting somebody else. In countries, mainly European countries, where there's well-regulated traffic and a lot of motorcycles, such as Germany, such as Italy, and there are others that you could get into, you have a lot less traffic injuries and accidents and fatalities than you do here in the US, because here in the US, you have almost nobody on mopeds or motorcycles. And we have really, really big fat cars where we can slam into whoever we want and basically play bumper cars on the road. Now, like, I'm not saying American roads are like absolutely horrible, depending on where you are. You know, here in New Jersey, they can be a little bit rough. Ever ridden through Patterson, it looks like a war zone. But in these European countries where motorcycling is and riding on mopeds is a lot more common, even in a lot of cases more common than cars, people just don't get into that many accidents because a motorcycle demands your attention. You can't be complacent on a motorcycle. You always need to be looking around, checking and thinking defensively, is that person going to do this? How do I avoid hitting into this person? You are forced to be a conscientious and responsible person on the road when you're on a motorcycle. And as well, while I haven't seen many studies or anything on this, so I can't speak exactly with confidence to what extent it goes to, I have a really hard time believing that being forced to be a responsible, conscientious person in one more area of your life is going to make you a worse person in general. The third benefit is reduced anxiety for everybody except your mother. Now, when you hear about motorcycle riding, you hear, oh no, all these people are gonna die, you're gonna die, your friend's gonna die, your mom's gonna die of fear, your bike is just gonna explode on you, all these things that people say, and then even the people who do know about riding and will tell you, actually, your bike's probably not gonna explode and you're probably not gonna die if you're doing this right, they're going to explain to you all the things you need to watch out for. You gotta assume that this rider is gonna change lane randomly and be an idiot because he's on his phone. You gotta assume the worst about everybody on the road, blah, 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 and it doesn't really sound that relaxing, but if you ask people who bike themselves, it can become a sort of meditation. And this leads to much lower anxiety, much lower levels of stress, because you're getting rid of all of it as you're riding. Just that time that was you scrolling on social media, honestly becoming more stressed probably by social media as your escape route for stress, but in the long run you become more anxious. All that time that you spent doing that, you're now spending alleviating stress instead. And people generally don't think about this in terms of overall societal benefit. Again, it's thought of more so as a me benefit, but benefits for individuals are benefits for societies. A society of less stressed, less anxious people is going to have more effective workers and people with better relationships in general, and I could just go on and on about it. I'm not going to list every single benefit of having lower anxiety to you. What I will note, though, there is a big difference between cruiser-style riding and sport bike-style riding. If you don't know what cruise and sport bikes are, go look it up. But a lot of sports bike riders, they ride pretty intensely. It's not the kind of thing that lets off stress. It's the kind of thing that creates a fun kind of stress until it creates medical stress, and that's a whole nother ballgame. Don't ride like that. I've seen too many sport bike squids. Don't be one of them. The fourth benefit, another mainly societal benefit that honestly I think would benefit me at least as an individual. I know I would like this one. All the idiots would die. Okay, well, not quite. They wouldn't all die, unfortunately, but it would become much harder to be an idiot on the road and in life in general. It would be much harder to be reckless, I think, and the society would change to become less reckless if motorcycling was the norm rather than riding in cars, unless you have people besides yourself that you're trying to transport. And a lot of people think of motorcycling as a reckless thing that idiots do. And unfortunately, a lot of the time, they're right. There are a lot of reckless idiots who ride motorcycles, who have absolutely no business being on the road in any motor vehicle at all. However, this is much further from the norm in motorcycle culture in general than I think a lot of people think it is. A lot of people who most of the time aren't actually that knowledgeable about motorcycling. And if it was the societal norm in the culture in general, I really believe that the more responsible echelons of motorcycle culture would be much, much more heavily pushed above the less responsible ones, and there'd be, I think, a lot more societal stigma just because there'd be a lot more focus on motorcycling in general, not just against motorcycling period, because somebody's deciding to ride a motorcycle, they don't care what you say about motorcycling in general. So when you specifically point out reckless motorcycling, they're gonna be like, stupid motorcycle hater, shut up. If you're in a pro motorcycle culture and then that entire culture is pushing responsible motorcycle riding, bringing people up into responsible motorcycle riding, there's basically nothing, there's not nothing they can do to be an idiot, trust me. There's a lot that people can do to be idiots, but it becomes kind of less of a cool thing. And again, I really have a hard time believing that this wouldn't just foster a greater sense of conscientiousness, focus, and responsibility in society in general. The last main benefit for people in societies is that motorcycling allows people to find a sense of community with a very large group of other people. We live in an age where finding a community is harder than ever, and it's having negative effects on both society and individuals. I'm not going to go into this because there's enough videos saying we have a loneliness epidemic among young men. Everybody already knows that we have this. I'm not writing you an essay right now arguing that specific point. So we're just taking it as a given. But motorcycling allows a sense of connection with other motorcyclers that driving a car, for example, doesn't really have. There's nobody who's like, what? You drive a car? Me too. First of all, because you can get a lot more individual with motorcycles, because even the expensive ones are not actually expensive when you compare them to cars, so you can get the motorcycle you want once you have enough experience to get it. It's also more of a journey. It requires overcoming a certain measure of fear. There's a lot more styles to pick from depending on how you want to ride. The progression through skills has a lot more different defined points on it. It's just a more immersive experience in general that more people enjoy. I could go on and on about why, but there's a much greater sense of community among motorcyclists than among just car riders in general. And when it comes to group rides, I'm sure this isn't something that a lot of people are thinking about much, but it becomes easier to create male-only spaces. Male-only spaces have experienced a lot of erasure over time. It's really a big faux pas to have spaces from which females are just completely excluded, but women have spaces where men aren't. Men do not have spaces where women aren't in a lot of cases, and that's not good for men. Men need to have spaces in which they can interact with just men. Women really, really don't like to hear it, but it's just a fact about men. It's a fact about women that they need to be able to interact with just women sometimes, that women will push on men and say, hey, get out of here, we need our female spaces, and that's perfectly fair. That's a perfectly fine point, and I completely agree with that. Men need the same as well. I personally have never seen, or at least I have no memory of seeing, a female in a motorcycle group ride. It's first of all just more common among males, and most of the female motorcyclists I've seen have been riding alone. It's a lot easier to find a male-only space in a group ride than it is in a lot of other scenarios. So while there's a lot of stigma and shame and, oh my god, your cousin's brother's uncle blah 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 died surrounding learning to ride a motorcycle, at the end of the day, the benefits far outweigh the risk. And if you really get down to it, the only thing stopping you is fear.